Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Olivia Anderson Leach, Manager for Public Education and Corporate Communication at the National Environment and Planning Agency, and I will be moderating today's proceedings. I would like to acknowledge the chairman, the vice chairman, and members of the Natural Resources Conservation Authority and the Town and Country Planning Authority who are here with us this afternoon. The agency welcomes every stakeholder group here today, including our environmental NGOs, representatives from academia, civil society, and every individual who has contributed to the process. The NRC and NEPA are grateful for your participation throughout the review of the environmental impact assessment, your participation in the public meetings, and your submission of comments. We also welcome the Chief Technical Directors from the Ministries of Housing, Urban Renewal, Environment, and Climate Change, the Economic Growth and Job Creation Ministry, as well as the Ministry of Transport and Mining, and the CTDs are Ms. Guthrie, Mr. Watson, and Dr. Rainford. We welcome you. We thank Mr. Ainsley Henry, CEO and Conservator of Forest at the Forestry Department, Mr. Peter Clark, CEO of the Water Resources Authority, and Mrs. Michelle Creed Nelson, Executive Director of the Jamaica National Heritage Trust. Joining us today in this session are to my right, Mr. Peter Knight. He is our CEO and Government Town Planner. Ms. Marjorie Waller, she's the Director of the Legal and Enforcement Division, as well as the Secretary for the Natural Resources Conservation Authority. We have Mr. Anthony McKenzie, Director of Environmental Management and Conservation, and he's to my left. We also welcome all the other agency executives and staff present. Thank you also to the members of the media fraternity who have joined us today. We are here today to brief all stakeholders on the Natural Resources Conservation Authority decision on Noranda's application for mining in SML 173. We're here to provide context and clarification on the decision. This will be provided by Mr. Knight with support from executives from the agency. Mr. Knight's audiovisual presentation will last for approximately 15 minutes, and he will take you through the NRC's decision on the application and provide clarification on that decision. Before I hand over to Mr. Knight, there are a few housekeeping matters to go through. There will be a 15-minute question and answer section after Mr. Knight's presentation. I'm therefore requesting that all direct questions concerning the decision be held until that time. To participate in the Q&A section, please use the raise hand feature and wait to be acknowledged prior to opening your mic. Once acknowledged, please state your name and indicate the organization you're representing as appropriate. For participants without a microphone, kindly direct your queries to the chat. I will ask those questions on your behalf. Please remember to keep your microphone on mute while someone else is on the floor, as we strive to maintain a mutually respectful proceeding. I now hand over to Mr. Knight to take you through his presentation.
Thank you very much, Olivia. Good afternoon to you all. On behalf of the chairman and members of the Natural Resources Conservation Authority, Town and Country Planning Authority, the executive management team, and the staff here at NEPA, let me wish you all a happy new year. And let me also say a very special thanks to you, valued stakeholders, for joining this briefing. The briefing is convened at the request of the chairman and members of the NRCA to brief you on the decision on the environmental permit applications by Noranda Jamaica Bauxite Partner 2 for mining in an area commonly referred to as SML 173, totaling 8,335 hectares. And you will see being displayed for you there the SML against the cockpit country protected area, which the mouse is showing you. So let's look at the cockpit country protected area, which is circumscribed in red, the SML 172, as well as SML 165, which have already been given up to Noranda. By way of background, you may recall that environmental permit applications for mining and quarrying and clearing of 6 hectares or more of vegetation, which is only the application category, was received by the NEPA in 2018. Even without triggering of the requirement of the agency's own screening process, the preparation of an EIA report was mandated in keeping with the 2017 policy decision of the Cabinet. Set terms of references were developed and signed off on after full consultation and the agreement of key regulatory partners, the Water Resources Authority, the Forestry Department, and the Jamaica National Heritage Trust. The terms of reference for the EIA was designed to cover all those lands excluding the forest reserves, now a modified total of 7,054 hectares, straddling the parishes of St. Anne and Trelawney. As you know, the EIA process was involved, time-consuming, and tiring. And what we are displaying for you is the graphic of the process. You can look at that while I speak. The agency having to review 4 previous iterations of the report before accepting the 5th version to form the basis of the public consultation. The EIA review process benefited tremendously from the full participation and involvement of stakeholders who put forward written submissions on issues and concerns. Subsequently, in-depth reviews of stakeholders' inputs, consolidation of the many issues and concerns submitted by stakeholder groups and individuals were submitted to the consultants for further attention, clarification, and resolution. We signed off on and oversaw the 2 mandatory public meetings. The second public meeting resulted from an intervention by the Ministry of Transport and Mining to claw back an area totaling 891 hectares, thereby reducing the size of the SML available for mining to 6,183 hectares of land. And we are displaying for you, and let me just take some time, Richard Nelson, so you'll just say what you have before you there.
We're displaying here the clawback area, this area here in brown on the screen, total of 891 hectares. Also, you're seeing bordered by yellow, are the forest reserves, a larger portion here, a small portion here, and the smallest species in this region. And of course, the purple boundary is the boundary for the SML 173.
Thank you, Richard. The involved technical inputs from key commenting agencies and departments bolstered the process. The review benefited also from intense scrutiny by the internal review and technical review committees. Also deliberated on and resolved were the comments and feedback received during the public consultation process. The recommendations from both the internal review committee and the Technical Review Committee were captured and developed in the submission and recommendations considered by the NRCA. It is worth emphasizing that the submission and recommendations to the NRCA were the considered joint position of key government agencies, having taken into account the substantial technical submissions and recommendations made by these key commenting agencies and departments: the Water Resources Authority, the Forestry Department, the Jamaica National Heritage Trust, and the National Works Agency. The Mines and Geology Division and the Jamaica Bauxite Institute also made submissions and recommendations. Naturally, the submission and recommendations to the NRCA came in for intense scrutiny and interrogation. After lengthy and robust deliberations over 2 full meetings, excluding the monthly updates and discussions, and after careful consideration of all the issues and concerns, the NRCA arrived at a final decision at an unscheduled meeting held on the 31st of December, 2021, which we will now share with you as stakeholders. So what is the decision? The NRCA approved the release of a very limited geographical area to Noranda, Jamaica Bauxite Partners 2, totaling approximately 1,324 hectares, exclusively in the parish of St. Anne. So Richard is now going to just display for you and take you through what I have just described.
So what was recommended to the authority is now displayed on screen, and it is that section shaded in white. That section here displayed in white, giving an approximate hectares of 1,483. It is in the southeastern section of the SML 173, and it is located in the parish of St. Anne. Here we're looking at is the border of the Trelawney and St. Anne parishes, and it is located in this area. The decision by the authority gives an area slightly smaller than what was recommended. That area is 1,324 hectares, and it is done so to exclude the Madras community and the school environment within that community.
Thank you, Richard. So here are the highlights of the decision by the NRCA, and there's going to be a little bit of repetition, so bear with me. The area release totals approximately 1,324 hectares of 6,163 hectares, and is located exclusively in the St. Anne parish. The geographical area will exclude the district of Madras and the school. 2, the agency is mandated by the NRCA to describe the boundaries of the very limited geographical area release, including GPS coordinates. 3, the geographical area is the most disturbed area in the SML, and in fact, the area overlaps with the study area where the most detailed assessments were carried out by the consultants, thus allowing for this informed decision. And again, I will pause and Richard will show you some graphics as to what I just said about the geographical area.
So as you see from the image, from the EIA, there are 9 study blocks, all shown here in red squares, outlined in red squares. And the smaller, I would say, I use the term heights in yellow with the black dot, indicate the bird survey areas, and the flags represent where the consultant undertook vegetation analysis. in the form of transits. Just by looking at the image, you realize that within the center area, very same area that have been released, that is where most of the studies were done with respect to the EIA. And visually, when you look at the other blocks, very limited work was undertaken in those areas. And the data that guides the information, the decision is basically within this area.
Thank you, Richard. Next point, the area primarily consists of secondary forests and fields. No disturbed broadleaf forest. Vegetation cover will be impacted in the geographical area release, as can be seen from the land use cover. 5. Noranda proposed mining in 5-year cycles. This geographical area was included in the 2020 to 2024 phase 1 and is described in detail in the EIA report. 6. The NRCA NEPA will mandate, I'd like you to listen quite carefully, the NRCA NEPA will mandate additional studies to inform the renewal of the environmental permit and for consideration of any future applications for mining outside the very limited geographical area released as phase 1. This means that the terms of reference is to be developed and agreed. The thinking is that the process to develop such terms of reference should involve stakeholders drawn from academia and environmental non-government organizations. 7. The environmental permit is to be prepared in line with the NRCA decision and will include specific and general conditions. 7. The levying of a substantial environmental performance bond will be included as an integral part of the permit. 9. Collaborative and structured compliance monitoring oversight by multi-agency partners, particularly the NEPA, the Water Resources Authority, Forestry Department, and the Jamaica National Heritage Trust. And 10, the NRCA has directed and agreed to incentivize NEPA to engage a qualified environmental professional to act as focal point to oversee compliance and monitoring. Stakeholders, you may be interested to hear that the NRCA decision took into account the following wider recommendations included in the submission it considered. And I will just raise some of them with you. One is that the Forestry Department would be mandated to ground truth and validate the cloudback area, and on completion, Cabinet be asked to agree that the cloudback area be included in the declared cockpit country protected area. That is, the 891 hectares to be sterilized and completely removed from the SML. 2, that the cockpit country protected area be gazetted with urgency. 3, that the declared setback buffer from the sensitive receptors in the cockpit country protected area be maintained as directed by the Cabinet. 4, that the Jamaica National Heritage Trust will oversee the work of Noranda's consultant undertaking the development and implementation of a mechanism for the protection of the cultural and archaeological heritage sites. 5, that the implementation of the UNDP, JEF, United Nations Development Program, Global Environment Facility, conserving biodiversity and reducing land degradation, using an integrated approach project, that is a cockpit country project, for oversight of that area, inclusive of the preparation of the management plan for the cockpit country protected area. 6, that a compensation mechanism be developed and executed to address the loss of livelihoods. 7, that the Ministry of Health and Wellness be mandated to issue terms of reference for the conduct of a health impact assessment report. 8, that memorandum of understandings with the Mines and Geology Division, Forestry Division, Forestry Department, NEPA, and the Water Resources Authority be established in regard to the depth of mining and restoration of mine areas. And 9, that a multi-agency monitoring and reporting framework be developed and implemented amongst the agencies, NEPA, WRA, Forestry Department, Jamaica National Heritage Trust, Mines and Geology, and the JBI. We know, and the NRC is aware, that the wider recommendations include policy decisions that will have to be taken. Those requirements have been sensitized already, and we know that there are going to be those policy decisions taken to mandate, not to leave it to agencies and departments to decide whether they are going to participate, but there are going to be policy instructions giving those directions. That is the briefing that we have prepared for you on the decision of the NRCA. And I now hand back to moderator Olivia.
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Knight, for the briefing. We'll now be proceeding to our question and answer section. In this section, we're requesting that we utilize the raise hand feature and wait to be acknowledged prior to opening your mic. Once acknowledged, please state your full name and indicate the organization you're representing as appropriate. For participants without a microphone, kindly direct your queries to the chat. I will ask those on your behalf. We're asking you to mute your microphones while someone else is speaking as we strive to maintain a mutually respectful procedure. So we will now take your questions. All right, so our first hand up, Chief Richard Curry. Please allow us to unmute.
Hi, good afternoon. Are you hearing me?
Yes.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. You may go ahead, Chief Curry. Chief Curry. All right, so next we have Mr. Hugh Dixon.
Hello?
Yes, go ahead, Mr. Dixon. Mr. Dixon? Okay. Mr. Dixon,
Yes, are you hearing me?
we are hearing you now. Go ahead, please.
Okay. Good afternoon to everybody. I have watched your presentation, Sir Peter, and it is obvious that you've given up 1,324 hectares of cockpit country as defined by the Cockpit Country Stakeholders Group. I'm disappointed, sir. And the question is, you have set out a couple of considerations which could be overruled, knowing the history of the government and your agency. I see one of your recommendations is that the clawback, the area, I'm using the term clawback now, that you would now be requesting that the balance from 8,335 hectares, if you take away 1,324, what's left, you are requesting that the government includes that in their contraption called the Cockpit Country Protected Area, and that it be gazetted immediately. I have a concern though with that recommendation, Brother Peter, because there are other areas that have special prospecting mining leases. And if the current contraption called the Cockpit Country Protected Area is gazetted now, it will mean that the accepted by the stakeholders, Cockpit Country Protected Area, Cockpit Country stakeholders boundary would become something that has been compromised in earnest. Can I beg of you to withdraw that idea, because there's going to be other issues raised in relationship to places in St. Elizabeth, close to a compound, and other areas sensitive within the landscape of Cockpit Country. I beg of your response, sir. I am also saying that the sacrificing of 1,324 hectares is unfortunate, because we really wanted to recover all of SML 173 and begin to look at an exit strategy for bauxite from Jamaica and the Cockpit Country as a wider consideration. But I would like to have your responses, sir, in regard to the recommendation to gazette what would now be the a clawback area and the CCPA, the contraption that the government has come up with.
Thank you, Brother Hugh. It's really good to see you. So let me seek to respond to your questions and concerns. The first response I will give, as a creature of the state, of the government, we are all public sector workers. We all agreed after many discussions at the cabinet level, all the technical officers, cabinet was guided, and we all agreed that what is now called the Cockpit Country Protected Area was a good decision. And we can't relieve from that, because we were front and center in advising the cabinet on that decision. Now, I can't get into discussion about any wider area, because that is a policy position of the government, the cabinet, supported and advised on by the key technical agencies. The second thing I'd like to say, we have given this matter careful consideration. Now, we want to be sure that there is seriousness about clawing back an area. And it is our view, and the view of the NRCA, that if you claw back an area and then it is left hanging out like a sore thumb, then someone can come back to claim it in a few years' time, sometime down the road. And it is our considered view that we should never allow that to happen. And that area, as we said in the statement, the cabinet should instruct that the forestry department ground through that area, and that area be wielded into what was originally signed off as the Cockpit Country Protected Area. As to sacrificing 1,300 hectares, we couldn't agree with you at all. Because if we go back to basics as to what the prescribed Cockpit Country Protected Area is, and remember, I'm speaking from a position of policy now, as to what the policy position is, then we could not agree that we are sacrificing. What we have done, and I think we have done it very well. And if we go back to the map, we will show you that it is only because we were satisfied that this is the area that was predominantly studied by the consultants. And that is the only reason why we have considered releasing that area. There's no other reason more than based on science and the empirical data and the review process that we went. And I hope that answers you, brother.
All right, thank you, Mr. Knight. We have a question, we have a hand raised from Teresa Rodriguez-Woody from the Jamaica Environment Trust, and then we will take questions and comments from the chat.
See you,
Dr.
Jet.
Rodriguez-Woody.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you for having me. Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Knight. It went a little quickly for me, but I do want to ask the buffer zone. Could you explain what is meant by the buffer zone to be maintained and directed by cabinets? And then in terms of if you have anything specific on this and in timelines, and are you planning on reissuing or redoing the boundary for SML 173?
Let me take the last part first. Remember, we don't have the mandate of redesigning the SMLs. That's a function of the Mines and Geology Division on advice, I would say, if we're asked. There were strong arguments in the cabinet when the government looked at the cockpit country and took a decision on it, and that was all the sensitive reactors and receptors and features were to be preserved, and they were to be set back arrangements from there. So that is what I'm referencing, that the setback arrangements, that we have to follow the directives and the decision of the cabinet. And it goes also that if there are sensitive receptors in the area, that the very restricted limited area, then that same principle will apply.
All right, thank you, Mr. Knight. We have a few comments from. All right, I don't seem to be. All right, from Miss Macaulay. One moment. In the interim, while we bring up Miss Macaulay's comments, Chief Corey, are you now back with us? All right, no. All right, so Ms. Macaulay's comments, will the boundary of SML 173 therefore be revised to include the 1324 hectares described as the released area? That's the first question.
Well, let's say the first question
The
first.
first
Let's go back
question.
to the map, because the release area is not in the, let's see what Ms. Macaulay is asking.
All right, so the question is,
Will
will
the
the
boundary-
boundary of SML 173
Wait for it.
be therefore revised to only include the 1324 hectare as described as the released area?
Again, Ms. Macaulay, thanks for that question. We don't have the jurisdiction to interrupt the SML. And there is a position that is going forward for discussion, and I can't get into that. But that area, if it will be adjusted, I'm just looking at the map, if it will be adjusted to be removed from the SML.
To reflect.
But you mean, so we redesign the SML excluding this area that is being.
So it is noted. This year would know with SML.
Oh, that is here. No, we have no, we can't determine that at this point. And so I think that's the best answer we can determine.
So secondly, as the boundary, as the CCP, that's the Cockpit Country Protected Area boundaries to be revised, why shouldn't it now include the clawback area and forest reserves at the very least? I think we may have answered that. Mr.
Yes,
Nadeau,
we did. We have said, and my brother Ubix asked that question. We have said that that is why the recommendation to the NRCA and the considered position of the NRCA supporting the recommendation went before it is that these areas are getting, well, remember that the forest areas were already excluded. And so we are now taking another piece of the pie, which is the clawback area, as stated in Parliament by Minister Montague. So that area now is taken off that SML completely. So it could mean, and it will mean, it will mean that the Mines and Geology Division, and I know they are on, will at some point, once a cabinet decision is made, will have to remove that clawback area and so on. So the SML naturally will be substantially reduced.
all right, Ms. Macaulay has a third question. Are there going to be, is there going to be a compensatory area? Oh, sorry. Are there going to be compensatory areas where mining will be allowed in St. Anne? And if so, where are these? Are there going to be compensatory areas where mining will be allowed in St. Anne? And if so, where are these?
Again, Ms. Macaulay, we have heard mention of additional SMLs. We have not been formally advised what these are, and we would prefer not to comment on those at this time.
All right, we have one.
Well, we should say, in keeping with the cabinet decision, that any SML that is developed by the cabinet decision automatically has to undergo an environmental impact assessment study report.
All right, so we have one more question from Susan. And that is, why are the forest reserves adjacent to the clawback area not going to be included in the Cockpit Country Protected Area? Why are they not going to be connected to their southern border? Why is there no buffer zone to the southern part of the 1324 block of the CCP? Let me go again. Why are the forest reserves adjacent to the clawback not going to be included in the Cockpit Country Protected Area? Why are they not going to be connected to their southern border? And why is there no buffer zone in the southeast part of the 1324 block to the CCP?
All right, let's try and answer that. Why is the forest reserve not going to be rolled into the clawback area and so on? I think the answer is simple, and that is, I don't want to say what intentions are, but when this matter goes before the cabinet, I'm sure it will exercise the mind of the cabinet, and you may get that sort of decision. I don't want to speak. You may get that sort of decision. What we know is that when that Cockpit Country Protected Area was being considered, there were strong arguments and instructions about those areas being preserved and no access whatsoever. That is why when we designed the terms of reference for the EIA, they were excluded. Now, as to whether there are buffer, to depend on Richard, as to whether there are buffer areas in the area to be released, I think there is going to be a buffer from the parish boundary. And these are, let me just say, today, a group of us, a small team, we just had a 5-minute discussion with Naranda's consultant and the Vice President Naranda. No one knew what the decision was until today, except, no one knew. So because Naranda is the applicant, we thought that it was useful. At 2:30 this afternoon, we had a discussion with the Vice President Naranda and the consultant to indicate verbally what was going to be allowed and what was not going to be allowed. We have not called in Noranda yet, because this decision now will require further dialogue with Noranda, Bauxite Partners, because there are instructions that there shall be a buffer along that area there. And I hope that answered your question.
Okay. All right, so I'm reviewing some more comments. All right, so from Mr. Dixon. And let's see, sorry.
Mr. Curry did come back.
All right, we have heard from Mr. Curry. All right, we're just reviewing the comments. All right, so in terms of Mr. Dixon asking us again to outline the protocols following this announcement. So firstly, we have some more questions in the chat. So first of the protocols, we're going to be sharing Mr. Knight's brief on our website, and a recording of this session will be placed on the agency's YouTube page at NEPA Jamaica. In terms of the protocols, the 10 protocols, that is what Mr. Dixon is referring. Would you mind going back over those tonight? The 10 activities that will happen. And then we'll take the other questions. If there's anyone else who would like to speak verbally, you may raise your hand and we can also take your queries. For the representatives from the media, we have a team available to field media inquiries and to participate in interviews over the next coming days. You can contact me directly via email at Olivia, so that's ollydia.anderson@nepa.gov.jm, or call 876-564-9367. And I've gotten a few of them already, and I will respond at the end of this meeting.
No, I'm not quite sure what you want. Is it that you want the highlights of the decision, or you want the wider issues? Well, the 10 next steps.
Can I speak?
Yes, please.
You have given a permit for this 1,300 plus hectares.
Correction, correction. We have not given a permit yet.
Oh, you are still contemplating it, because that would be interesting.
No. But remember, the NRCA made a decision for a very limited area. We now have to go and coin and have the discussion and coin the specific and general conditions of this environmental permit.
So my question that you didn't understand, Sir Peter, was in the chronological order of steps leading to an action on what's your internal decision. What are the chronological steps that will follow to effectively install your decision?
Okay.
And also quickly to add to that, if you are likely to be overruled, which is the common behavior of the government in recent times in relationship to issues of this sort, where you are concerned and your agency.
Let me take the last part of the question.
I realize you have a sensitive position as the head of the agency, but I'm speaking as a Jamaican.
No, but I can speak.
So pardon me for being the case.
I can speak candidly.
Okay, my brother.
Whether we are going to be overruled, the technical secretary and the legal advisor to the NRCA sitting right beside me this morning. Remember that any decision taken by the NRCA can be appealed. So, Noranda Jamaica Bauxite Partners 2 can appeal the decision of the NRCA. And you saw the decision of the NRCA to release a very limited area parcel of land, which is 1,300 plus. Now, we don't have the experience, and I have not had this experience in all my years here, that a minister overrule a decision that is not appealed. I've never had that experience. So it is quite unlikely that we are going to be overruled. So I would not consider that at all. So I'm confident that the decision will stand. The chronology that will follow now is that, one, we will have to advise the applicant, and the applicant is Noranda Jamaica Bauxite Partners 2, of the decision, and that's the job of the secretary to the authorities, Ms. Wallow. We will advise Noranda Jamaica Bauxite Partners 2 of the decision of the authority in writing to grant a very limited area for mining. So that's the first part of the chronology, to advise Noranda formally. We hope that Noranda will accept the decision of the NRC. So it follows then that we will regroup and we will look at the submission that went to the authority, the NRCA. We will look at the issues that were raised, and the NRCA gave some specific instructions. For example, the GPS referencing of that area. And staff members are going out tomorrow to ground to do that GPS referencing. So we expect that they will accept the decision of the NRCA. We will then do a huddle together, prepare the specific and general conditions. We will also, as part of that chronology, of necessity, re-engage our key commenting agencies, the Water Resources Authority, the Jamaica National Heritage Trust, and the Forestry Department in coining certain phases. Part of that chronology also is to prepare an inter-agency monitoring and compliance regime that will have oversight. You asked about chronology. Naturally, we have to have a submission to the authority to receive the funds to employ that focal point to oversee what is to be done for the monitoring done. All of that will be done. So all the agency will contribute to the permit conditions. We will then have to finalize those conditions, and naturally the permit will be signed, and Noranda will be advised that the environmental permit, and they pay the fee, collect the permit. The chronology also is that Noranda can appeal any condition of the permit that we set, and these are not light decisions that we take. We don't amend permits quite easily. You have to come with good science and good justification for an amendment. And of course, the levying of the environmental performance bond to tie Noranda Jamaica Bauxite Partners to some specific performance-based conditions of the environmental permit. And I think, brother, you know we did that very well. You are familiar with our work on the ground. So those are some of the step-by-step activities that will take place.
All right, so we have, thank you, Mr. Knight. So we have a question from Jay Powell. Is there any information on how people were displaced as a result of the mining lease of this granting of the 1324?
I don't think we have that to the top of our head as to the population in the very limited area that is being released. But bear in mind that we said that and the NRCA was not supportive of releasing that area, Richard, if you go back. with the school and the madras, that community around the school. So the displacement of that specific area will be avoided. So that's a decision of the authority. If you go back to the recommendation, according to the authority, Richard, go back to the recommendation. If you notice, J.
Powell.
Ms. J. Powell, whoever J. Powell, J. Powell, if you notice, this is the recommendation that went to the authority, and you will see how that is modified in its final decision. So take a good look at what went to the authority, which would have included the Madras community and the school. And if Richard can point out where exactly the school is somewhere right there, if you can see the pointer. And there's a community right around that school. And the authority has decided that it is not prepared to release those areas. And so you can see the distinct redesigning of the area, the very limited area to be released.
Another question from Wendy Hart. Why wouldn't the entire area that is not in the approved area for release be recommended as a clawback area?
Go that again. Where is the?
From Wendy Hart. Why would the entire area that is not in the approved area for release be recommended as a clawback area?
Well, Wendy, that is a decision for the cabinet. That is not a decision that as a regulator we can make. We are making certain recommendations which we are not prepared to disclose. But those are cabinet decisions. You know, that clawback area of 891 is a response of the government to the stakeholders' intervention. So I would not be surprised if there are other stakeholder interventions and there are other policy decisions. That's the best I can say.
All right, thank you, Mr. Knight. We have another question from Susan. When will the Ministry of Health assessment begin? And what are the areas to be surveyed with regard to baseline conditions? And will the communities in SML 172 be included? So again, when will the Ministry of Health impact assessment begin? What areas will be surveyed with regards to baseline conditions? And will communities in SML 172 be included?
All right, we can't speak for the Ministry of Health and Wellness, but what we know is that the Ministry of Health and Wellness has generic terms of reference for conducting health impact assessments. We know that as a fact. And that is why I thought that was what Brother Hugh was talking to. That is why we spoke about the wider recommendations that the NRCA considered. Now, as you know, we cannot instruct the Ministry of Health, but we expect that at a certain level, the cabinet will give those instructions that the health impact assessment is to be done. As to the scope and the area of impact of the study, the Ministry of Health would have to determine that. But we expect some instructions from the cabinet based on what I've gone through with you. And I can't be prepared to say anything more on that. I hope you understand, Wendy.
So that's Susan. Dr. Cody.
Oh, that's Dr. Cody. Okay.
All right.
Hi,
So,
Dr. Cody.
right, I am not seeing from my perspective any further comments in the chat. Would anyone else like to pose a question concerning the decision at this time?
So just to be clear, moderator, just to be clear, Brother Hugh, we want all the stakeholders, and that is why we invited all of, close to 100 stakeholders, and we ensure that all the persons who participated in the process by making written comments, that we invited everyone. Just to be sure, we want to be very, very clear what the decision of the NRCA is. And Richard, I'm going to go back to that map. So the NRCA, I just want to repeat it for emphasis, that the decision of the NRCA is to release an area of approximately 30, that is our estimate, an area of approximately 1324 hectares of the 6,163 hectares exclusively, located exclusively in the parish of Center. And that area excludes the school and the Madras community. So we want to be very clear that what the NRCA decided after intense discussion is, and we had the science and the empirical data as to why that was possible. And we already told you that the consultant did a lot of work. If you republish again, Richard, just to be clear, that we had a basis for the decision that we made, and you can see why. If you look at the other areas, you can see that the assessment was not that intensive over the other areas. That is why. So we want the stakeholders to be very clear that those are the decisions of the NRC.
All right, thank you, Mr. Knight. Thank you everyone for joining us for today's briefing. Please note that a copy of Mr. Knight's presentation will be made available on the agency's website after this session. A recording of the session will also be shared on the agency's YouTube page. That's at NEPA Jamaica on YouTube. Members of the media, the agency is available to facilitate interviews on this matter after today's briefing. You may contact me directly at olivia.anderson@nepa.gov.jm or call me at 876-564-9397. Thank you so much for your time this afternoon. Thank you for joining us, and all the best.
Happy New Year, everyone.
Same to you, Peter.